sort of goes into our next question, which originally was why did you become an archivist slash how did you become an archivist? But if you'd like to also address the switch to records management, then that would be great to hear as well.
Sure. So I went to UT Austin as an undergrad, so I was very aware of their iSchool. While I was there, I worked for a professor in Middle Eastern Studies section department because I actually wanted to be an Egyptologist when I started undergrad. So I did specialize in ancient Roman, Greek, and Egyptian art and architecture. I took a lot of conference courses pertaining to that, and then I worked for a professor who specialized in early writing. So I did a lot of archival pickups and research and made sure to go and get some resources for her. And so I visited many archives while I was in undergrad, and that's how I became aware of them. Um, and then I graduated, of course, just volunteered in a museum, realized, what the actual real world situation is like for curators, not to mention POC curators. And I was like, oh, okay, this probably isn't going to be feasible or work out. And if it does, it's going to be a struggle. Um, so I went back to banking, which I had done off and on from a retail perspective since I was 17 and had always been a great backup. So I ended up working in corporate banking for a few years. And while I was there, um, I was like, oh, look, I'm handling all these records and I'm managing the records for this department. And this is a job. And I started, looking into it. I thought, oh, it's parallel to the archival profession. And I started looking at programs. And so I ended up going with Simmons and went to Boston in 2007 to get my master's degree. And while I was there, interned or worked at the Simmons College Archives. I interned at the Peabody Museum at Harvard um, of Archaeology and Ethnology, and then also at Mass Historical. And then in between that, because I was really paranoid and the recession hit, and I saw that, even Harvard was laying people off. And when that happened, everybody kind of freaked out. So I was like, oh, I need as much experience in different types of archives with different types of files and formats and different, CMSs as much as possible. So I'm as marketable as I can be. And I ended up interning between, I call it the archivist at the Johnson Space Center Archives at UH Clear Lake, University of Houston Clear Lake, and ended up securing an internship between my first and second year while I was home. And then, yeah, and then when I was graduating, I thought, well, I'd like to go back to Texas because the cost of living on the East Coast is kind of ridiculous. And when you grow up on the Gulf Coast, you can see how your dollars really stretch. Um, so I started applying for jobs that were closer to Texas, and my first gig was in a really small town in South Texas that was actually pertinent to the Texas Revolution, and so it was a town of 2,000, and the county I think had 20,000, and I ended up moving there afterward, and it was interesting. I reported to the library board, which was made up of retired teachers. So they weren't really familiar with what I was supposed to be doing, which is why I was really glad that I'd had so much experience prior to going. They had hired a consultant from Houston at one point to come in and create a draft of what needed to be done, what needed to be addressed, how it should be addressed, and of course to hire a professional archivist. So they had hired someone prior to me who had left, and I was her successor. And so that those policies and procedures helped out considerably well, having my first gig in that small town with no help or assistance nearby. So and then what I realized was that all of the historical materials from 1836 were at either Austin or the state. So they didn't really have a lot of materials, historical materials that had to deal with that and the mission that was nearby. And so I was like, okay, so there's got to be other things I can do here in the area. And so I ended up bringing in the Methodist Church's records. And so there were institutional records more so than historical, because the Methodist Church keeps a lot of their birth and marriage and death certificates and books. So I kept mostly their institutional, how that church started, their board meeting minutes, things of that nature. I started a collection for the library board as well, and just started doing more institutional archival collections that had to deal with the library, the archives, the county, that kind of thing. Did some work with the local historical commission, and then my next job after that was with the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. And while I was there, my boss noticed that I had had records management experience, and that when I was at Simmons, you did have an entire course. I want to say I had at least two, but at least one definitely, but at max one, two um, records management courses. And that's when I started picking up, oh, this isn't normal for people to have that background or at least have a semester of it. So I counted myself really lucky at that point. And she was like, can you start getting the institutional archives together for this museum because they've never done it before? And I was like, okay, I'll draft some policies and procedures and see if we can get started. And then when I went to UT Arlington after that, the same thing happened. They had a records manager that reported to the provost's office. I believe she's still there. She was retired and thought that she would take a part time gig nearby that would occupy her time, her spare time, and it ended up turning into a full time position again for her. So, since I was the university archivist, we were working in tandem to determine, when, records become archival. And it was really kind of mind boggling that the UT system doesn't have a set retention schedule for all of its sister or subsidiary um, universities. So it was kind of interesting that we each had to do them on our own. And I found that in Texas, that kind of happens a lot with institutions that have um, other sister institutions in other cities, that they don't do it from like a system wide. Each institution has to do it themselves, which is kind of frustrating, especially when you don't have the staff to do that. And you don't have the direction to do it. But what's really amazing about Texas also is that the Texas State Library and Archives Commission does have retention schedules that are for colleges, junior colleges, local government. It's all mapped out. So all you have to do is pretty much um, double check with your departments that those are the records they create, which ones they don't, wipe them out, cater it to your institution, and then you've got a retention schedule in place. But it's still a lot of work because you've got to confirm and meet with all those departments. Departments have sub-departments, sub-sub-departments, and it can get really granular very fast, and it kind of becomes a mess. But when I went to the Whitney Museum in San Antonio, I ended up doing the same thing, building institutional archives because they had never, I was the first archivist in their 82-year history at that time. So they had a lot of amazing archival collections, but they didn't have anything documenting the institution itself, and they had plenty of material to be doing that, and to have those collections in place. So I started that there. Um, Museum of Fine Arts Houston already had an amazing institutional archives collection scope in place. So it was just a matter of continuing that and moving it forward. And then that's how I found myself, at Houston Community College as a director of records management. And they also really had a great program in place too, as far as the retention schedules go. We do create our subsidiaries, but yeah, that's kind of how I made that transition. Is that um, being a single woman in your mid 40s, and you start thinking about retirement and everything else, and you're like, oh, I need to start looking at this and how to take care of myself with a single income. And I had taken my father had passed away in 2016, so when I was in San Antonio, I needed to get back home to Houston to help my mom out, and it always been a dream growing up in Houston to work at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. And Lorraine Stewart had told me at the time that she needed an assistant archivist, somebody who hit the ground running, and I needed a job there. So I ended up taking a pretty sizable pay cut to get back to Houston. And when Lorraine left, I realized how much she had been getting paid after working there for 20 plus years as the head of the archives of a major museum, national museum. And I was floored. I was just that I can't believe it's taken her that long to get over 80,000 in a prominent, I mean, fourth largest city in the country, and a prominent museum at that. And I wasn't going to get things had happened after she left. So I think the idea was that I, with my experience, would be able to move into that position, but it unfortunately didn't work out that way. So I started looking at other options, and a friend of mine told me about the HCC gig, and lo and behold, I was in shock when I got the call that, well, not that I had gotten the job, I was like, yay. But I mean, when they told me the compensation package, I was ready to negotiate. I had all my terms laid out. I was ready to go. And I'm still kicking myself because I thought maybe I could have negotiated more and gotten more. But I was so shocked at the starting salary. And I was like, oh my God, Lorraine had worked 20 plus years in museums to get to 80, and they're offering me like 81. And I, off the bat, and I was just like, this is insane. I couldn't believe it. Just all of that hit me at once on that phone call. And then I thought, oh, I have to actually answer this man. So yeah, and then it dawned on me. I was like, but it's just, I even knew what the range was, but to think that you would be offered, at that end, what the difference is just amazing, and sad, and really frustrating. Um, but I thought, I just can't, now that I've, taken care of my own personal goals, I can't just leave behind the things that I've been working on before because they're still very important to me. Um, especially we're so academic heavy in the profession in SAA that just trying to look out for more smaller nonprofits and other groups and working on standardizing to some degree or as much as we can archival salary. So yeah, I'm still trying to work on that as much as I can. But yeah, that's how I transitioned. It was basically pay and opportunity. And I actually do enjoy records management. I miss archives. I'm actually building the HCC archives right now because they just had their 50th anniversary and they've never built anything either. They started as another school in the 20s, which split off into the University of Houston and Texas Southern. And um, they just never, they never, they just formed their own archives at those two institutions. And so I think Houston Public Library has some of the materials as well. But they still produced when they HCC started in the 70s. And so yeah, I've been working on that and working with Erica Hubbard, who's our director of libraries, who's amazing. They have a fashion archives, which is astounding that a junior college would have a fashion archives, but it was donated by a local family, a local socialite, and then her friends started donating, and there are just some amazing pieces in that collection. So um, I noticed that digital preservation was an issue at this institution, and it seems like records managers, there's been so many webinars out there right now in the RIM world that have to do with digital preservation because I don't think so many of them have been wrangling with just electronic content management that they haven't really, I think, started looking towards preserving things that are 10 plus years or permanent. So I that was a goal of mine since I first got here. And we're working on phase 2 of our digital preservation system. And so that should be up and running pretty soon. And I'm hoping that that will help out with our essential records program as well. Um, but yeah, it's been great making the switch and I enjoyed it thoroughly, but I still think I'm an archivist at heart.
Yeah, I think it never really quite leaves us.
It does.
Yeah. You've had quite a career thus far. I didn't
Yeah.
know quite how much you got like jam-packed in there. It's full of good stuff.
Yeah, there for a while, it was 10 years of a lot of moving. I
Mm.
got really good at packing and moving and figuring that out. But yeah, most of it was upward mobility and moving for upward mobility and jobs. And it was really funny when I got the job at the Cowboy. My boss said to me my first day on the job, she said, I'm not paying you enough. I can't pay you what you deserve, and you deserve a lot more than what we can. And but I'm going to do everything I can for you regarding professional development. I'm going to send you to whatever you want to go to, whatever we have money for. I'm going to send you to. You'll go with me on donor visits. I'll do whatever we can to boost you so that we can get you another job. That's and I was like, this is my first day on the job. You're always trying to get me another job. I just moved here. I drove 8 hours, but yeah. So it's been interesting to say the least to see how different academic and museum and how they function, especially here in Texas and other places I've worked. So yeah, I don't think you quite see the regional differences until you've actually moved around some and seen it. And graduate school surely doesn't prepare you for that.